Welcome to the Collective Regional Summit presented by Community Trust Bank. We had 3 excellent sessions yesterday. Ted Abernathy presented on economic trends and charting a course for an uncertain future. A panel of business leaders talked about the impacts of the pandemic and beyond on the local economy. Issue experts also discussed the broadband connectivity challenges. So now we're ready for day 2 of the Regional Summit. And I'd like to welcome Billy Dollins, Market President for Community Trust Bank, to come to the podium here to make a couple special remarks. Billy.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning. I'm Billy Dollins with Community Trust Bank. It's always an honor for me to be with what I believe the most passionate and outstanding leaders in our state. So thank you for being here. These are unprecedented and challenging times when we need to come together as communities. So think about the next 2 days. Share ideas, participate. Think outside the box. Think about what will bring us closer together for the betterment of our communities and our businesses and, more importantly, our families. I thank Bob and his staff for bringing us together for this wonderful summit. I know we all look forward to when we can be actually together again. So with that, I wish you all a happy, safe, healthy, and socially distanced holiday. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you very much, Billy. This morning, we have several experts in the economic development field joining us for a discussion about job creation efforts in Central Kentucky. Our top-notch panel will be exploring our strengths, our challenges, and providing insight on our growth opportunities. Let me recognize John Bevington, Director of Business and Economic Development for Kentucky Utilities. For sponsor remarks, John will also be serving as the moderator of today's session and will introduce the panelists and get started with that discussion. So, John, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I think I drew the short straw getting to do the sponsor remarks as well as the panelist discussion here this morning. It seems like David Frybert, your normal sponsor opening remarks guy, has deferred to me this morning, but it's an honor for me to do so. I'm glad to represent the 3,500 working men and women at Kentucky Utilities and LG&E who have been working around the clock in this unprecedented year to provide safe, reliable, and affordable energy to the communities that we serve. Our efforts really are truly Kentucky, as we serve in, I think, 80 counties of the 120 in the state and in the Commonwealth. You know, throughout this year, it's been really an interesting time for us as a business, for certain. But our employees have really stepped up and answered the call to serve the communities that we serve in the best way possible. As an example, on an annual basis, our employees, our companies, and our foundation supply nearly $7 million to the communities that we serve through nonprofit organizations and other initiatives. We also have ramped up our planning efforts on the economic development front, some of which you'll hear here today, by setting up a site identification process to find new sites and buildings across our service territory to attract new customers and to interest prospects. We've set up a matching grant fund. Bob, can you still hear us? Okay. We've also set up a matching grant fund to incentivize communities to make proactive development in land and buildings on a go-forward basis. So there are a variety of things that we're doing in the planning phase while prospects and projects may come and go a little bit with the pandemic and so forth. Again, we are ramping up our planning efforts to serve our communities in the best way possible. So I am now pleased to, again, have Kentucky Utilities be the sponsor of this panel on economic development. We've got some great friends of mine who are participants in this, and more than great friends of mine, they are truly experts within the industry and in the leadership in the state of Kentucky representative on this panel here today. So I would like to welcome, and the bios for these individuals are in your briefing packets that are in front of you. So I encourage you to sort of read those and digest the true talent that we have with us today. I'm just going to introduce them in names and titles and talk about a little bit, why, again, these friends and partners are with us today. So we've got DiDi Caldwell, President and Founding Principal of Global Location Strategies, coming to us from Greenville, South Carolina. Good morning, DiDi. We also have Beth Land, Vice President of Industrial and Economic Development for Site Selection Group. Site Selection Group is based and headquartered in Dallas, Texas, but Beth is also in Greenville, South Carolina, which happens to sort of be the center of the universe for economic development consultants, it seems. So good morning, Beth.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
And then we've got finally, last but not least, Jeff Taylor, the Commissioner for Business Development at the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. Jeff is coming to us, I believe, from Hopkinsville, Kentucky this morning, his hometown. But Jeff has been in that leadership position at the cabinet now for over a year, I think, and doing great things with his team there in terms of education and training and leading our state and economic development initiatives. So, Jeff, thanks for joining us as well this morning.
Pleased to be here.
Okay. So I'll lead off by saying, and maybe posing a question to the entire group. Given the circumstances that we are in today, and maybe even over the past several years, I think economic development process is a very competitive one, and each community and each state oftentimes has a professional working for them. They've got budgets associated with it. I'm interested if you could tell the audience here this morning how economic development and the economic development landscape has changed or is changing, and what regions need to be doing to be better prepared to recruit businesses during this pandemic and beyond. So I'll start by having maybe Beth, you can give us a little bit of feedback on that, and then we'll go to DiDi.
Absolutely. Thanks. So I guess I'll start by saying that I started my career in economic development on the public side, working for a county in South Carolina, trying to recruit investment, much like, the professionals in Lexington and the surrounding area are. And I do not envy economic developers today, because what I thought was already a difficult job has become even more difficult. I mean, these teams are, highly polished, highly professional, very good at what they do. And the thing that it keeps kind of crunching is our clients' deadlines. And so what DiDi and I do, we help companies choose where to locate. That's everything from figuring out their logistics network, all the way through kind of that feasibility study, go or no go. We're talking about, workforce filtering. How do we find communities that really align with the needs of our companies? So, these deadlines to make these decisions keep getting crunched and crunched and crunched and crunched. And it makes it very difficult as, we're working through these decisions to make them that quickly. And that's why economic developers are working so hard to have as much prepared from a marketing perspective. And I think that is probably, as we shift towards this new post kind of COVID world, that's one of the things that I am seeing as a really big differentiator. Number one is getting in that market filtering and staying in there. How do you respond to RFIs in a way that keeps you in that funnel, especially in a virtual world where DiDi and I are doing a lot of virtual site visits? Virtual site visits, I've never had a client make a decision where they say, yes, we would like to be at this property based on that virtual site visit. That's kind of not how it happens. What happens is it's a market filtering where we can say, yeah, we want to eliminate that property based on that virtual site visit. It's a very tough place to be, and that's why you have to be so good at executing virtual site visits. And that's one way that we've at least changed from a virtual perspective. So I'll pause there and kind of let DiDi comment from her perspective on kind of some recent trends that she's seeing as well, and happy to comment more.
Thanks, Beth. I think what we're seeing right now is that even before the pandemic, the expectation from either the consultant or the company side, because there are many, many site selection decisions that are made with the help of a consultant, the expectation that economic developers will have all of the information that is needed in a very timely manner. And what timely manner has been compressed over the last years that I've been doing this. But my concerns moving forward are economic developments organizations' ability to have the resources that they need, because a lot of their funds are being are under threat simply because of a drop in tax revenues, potentially a lack of funding from the private sector due to, pandemic conditions. And we really rely on the economic developers to be both proactive, so focusing on the fundamentals, focusing on identifying and developing good quality sites so that your project can land there, focusing on developing the workforce, developing on getting your name out there, all of those proactive things. But then for Beth and I, the reactive piece is really important. So when we send an RFI or we want to schedule a virtual site visit or a in-person site visit, we need team members on the other side helping facilitate all of those so that we can get the information to our clients and keep that location alive and with a chance to win. And then you've got this third piece, which is really being able to come forth with, no site is perfect. And a lot of times either financial or non-financial incentives are needed to separate you from the pack. And so having the resources and the ability to do that, I think, is going to be under threat based on some of the funding issues that we're seeing now.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's kind of specific to kind of the Lexington area is where you are in the world, because it can be kind of a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that you're in the center of the United States. Whenever, DiDi or I do a logistics analysis, we're trying to filter down to where does it make sense in the world to be. A lot of times, Lexington and kind of Kentucky in general is popping up at the very top of those logistics network analysis, which is great. The downside is that you are getting inundated with distribution, which can oftentimes take up a lot of your prime industrial real estate. And that video in the beginning, I don't know if I just wasn't expecting it or I'm not used to videos being so blunt and candid, and it's very refreshing. There's some key issues that we deal with in economic development. And as they said in the video, the lack of industrial real estate is a problem, frankly, around the Lexington area, but it's not just specific to Lexington. That's across the country, and that's something that we're dealing with. But particularly because of where you are logistically in the world and how well you can serve a lot of different markets from your location, you're getting probably hit a lot harder than most areas.
And add to that the pressure from residential developers, solar developers. Land that is flat and developable is, particularly in an area where Lexington, where the private sector is really stepping in, is, being gobbled up. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons why it's imperative for communities like Lexington to there a plan to preserve some of those good industrial.
Yeah, thanks. No, those are really important topics. And Beth, you mentioned the video, and as I was listening to it, I'm like you, there were, it's clear that the Lexington business community and those that participated in that video understand, and I think that's an important factor, right, is that they understand the challenges and the opportunities to attract new businesses so that we can sort of develop solutions to the problems and capitalize on the opportunities that are present. I want to touch on a little bit more of the site conversations here in just a second, but I also want to, in the aspect of, what can we be doing today to prepare ourselves for economic development opportunities? I want to also ask Commissioner Taylor, what has your staff and team seen in terms of virtual site visits, and, how prevalent is that today on your team, Jeff?
John, it's very prevalent. And, virtual site visits were taking place well before COVID. And DiDi's been one of the leaders in that. I've tracked her career where she's gone around doing seminars and training. I'm a movie buff. I've watched the movie X-Men over and over. There's a portion of that movie where Dr. Jean Grey, after she dies at the dam, says, that mutation is what leads to evolution. It's the key to evolution. And it takes thousands and thousands of years, but every so often it jumps ahead by millennials. And I think that's what's happened with COVID. We were going this direction anyway. Some communities were better prepared than others, but everybody has to get prepared because a great portion of this, we're just not going to go back. We're here. We're going to stay here. The stay-at-home jobs, they're here. They're going to stay. There are a lot of studies that show you're more productive at home. As Beth said, or someone said, I'm in Hopkinsville at my house now, and I work far harder here at the house because I can't get away. But communities just have to get get prepared, make sure they have the technology. This leads into a whole array of issues, the homeschooling, rural access, and broadband. It's just preparation and having the right technology to be able to deliver a good product. And that's the key. Doesn't matter how much technology you have, if you don't have a good product to market to these companies and consultants, you're just not going to be in the game. So that goes back to the build ready. It goes back to a speed to market, how quickly you can answer their questions. I just don't believe it should take a day to answer a question about a site that's been in your community for years. If it needs gas, if it needs rail, all those questions should be readily available. Just speed to market and being prepared.
So two key themes that came out of all three of your comments were speed and budget necessary to sort of accomplish that speed to market, right? And again, the budget relates to the preparation of sites and buildings and the marketing of sites and buildings and so forth. So, you know, in the challenge that certain communities may have from a funding perspective, what's the growing level of importance of regional organizations? You know, certainly in the Central Kentucky region, we have the Bluegrass Alliance, which includes Lexington and many of the surrounding communities. You know, I'm interested in your all's perspective on regional, you know, regionally focused alliances like that, and maybe give an example of some that are working really, really well around the country. So not to put you on the spot, DiDi, but I'm going to go to you first, and then we'll see what Beth has to say.
Well, I'm a big believer in regional efforts. Number one, because it's really difficult for every community to market itself to a broad range of potential investors. And I can tell you some places that don't do it very well. Texas, for example, because of their special local option sales tax, they have communities which are right door to one another that are marketing themselves independently to us and to companies and other site selectors. And it's really confusing because I'm not sure that my clients really care where the city boundary for Longview happens. I mean, it's nonsensical. Some places where I've seen it working really well, and right here in the upstate, we have Upstate South Carolina Regional Economic Development Group that does a really good job of representing, I think, 13 counties. And pretty much the whole state of South Carolina is covered by a regional group. And while they don't technically work projects, they are mostly a marketing and lead generation firm, but they can also come in and add funding and facilitate some of the visits, help smaller communities. I mean, particularly if you're in a more rural area or you just don't have enough of a budget to hire a full economic development staff, those regional organizations really provide some of that backfill staffing.
Yep.
Beth, your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think DiDi hit it nail on the head, so I won't belabor it too much. But I think that, you know, one of the things about regional groups is one of the reasons we have regional groups is because our assets are regional, right? So we've got, you know, workforce attraction and workforce talent pools that cross city and county boundaries. So why would we not, you know, also leverage all those assets to market the region? And I think that, you know, like DiDi said, but just to harp again, I don't think that it's the judge executive or it's the local county economic developer's job to go out and drum up leads. It's their job to prepare their community for whenever the lead hits. It's the regional group's job to go out there and be a lead generator, just like, you know, Jeff's team does for the whole Commonwealth. You know, they are out there trying to drum up leads. The local's job is really to be prepared, you know, in lockstep for whenever that lead hits the door, that they are able to respond just like that. And that's just my perspective. And, you know, at York, whenever I was at the local level at York County, I certainly went on some trade shows and certain things like that. But I really think that the locals' time is best spent dedicating it to product development, to workforce training, and to, you know, taking care of your local industries. So, and
it's very difficult to market. I mean, you know, you think about if you're pitching yourself to a European or an Asian investor, Kentucky is blessed in that they do have name recognition. I mean, between Kentucky Chicken, Kentucky Bourbon, and the Kentucky Derby, I mean, you have a benefit that many, many other states don't have. So, you know, by all means, leverage that to the greatest extent possible. But, you know, a lot of people that are not from this probably cannot pick out Kentucky on the map. They have no idea. They know New York, Los Angeles, and the so, the regional groups can really help. What's that?
And maybe Myrtle Beach. That seems to be a
Maybe Myrtle Beach, yeah, south of the border.
I don't say sometimes, but anyways.
But imagine if you are, even Lexington. I mean, there's how many Lexingtons in the country are there? So a regional group can kind of take that name recognition and build enough critical mass so that it makes sense to spend the money to market to a lot of these, foreign investors, go to trade shows, have, visit companies, that sort of thing.
John, there's a natural sequence to regionalism for many of our metropolitan areas. The challenge is, and where we have to improve, is in our rural areas where the populations are dwindling. They don't really have a choice other than to go regional because of lack of workforce, where people are moving from the rural areas to the metro areas and populations are declining. They're going to have to invest in regional parks and regional collaborations, and then everybody's sharing the success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you guys all said this, the assets are what's important. And, you have to know and be okay with, our asset is the more metropolitan area with shopping and restaurants and livability and those sorts of things. And you as a next door community have the assets of more land, a plethora of land, more affordability of land and so forth. And that's all okay. And what's good for one is good for the other sort of perspective. And that's hard to do without revenue sharing agreements and so forth. But certainly communities that are doing this stuff together and telling their story together, have a greater chance for more opportunities as we move forward, I think, right?
Absolutely.
So what I didn't mention specifically in my intro, but I will now, is related to this next question. So again, I had mentioned in my sponsor remarks that LG&E and KU have started or initiated a few new strategic developments just in the last year that I think are important to the preparedness of our communities across the Commonwealth and really demand a third-party perspective so that we can get a true outsider's view on, what our assets are or what our assets should be in order to be most competitive. So I want to touch on both of those right now. Beth and DiDi have both played a significant part in those initiatives. DiDi on an initiative for us to identify new sites around our service territory in those 80 counties that we serve. So again, I'll let DiDi talk a little bit about the process, but at a high level, we are concerned as a utility company about the density of available sites to market to clients. We've had a great amount of success over the 100 years of our existence, and many of those industrial parks that were invested in early on are now full, and we have to find new ways to market to our clients. And so DiDi was involved, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that site identification process. Conversely, Beth has been involved in an initiative that's a statewide partnership between utilities and our communities and the state called the Product Development Initiative. And that is taking existing sites and buildings and really evaluating them for what investment needs are necessary to promote them to a better stage of the game, basically. Maybe it's a site that's been around for 10 or 15 years and it sort of just needs a little bit of polishing or needs a little bit of work. And so Beth and Site Selection Group have been the consultant of record for that, really helping judge the communities and spending a lot of time here evaluating them. So let's start with the site identification process. DiDi, maybe you can lay out, your process, how that has gone, and what you've learned specifically about the Bluegrass region with regard to that site identification process.
So one of the things that has transformed this site identification process is using digital technology, geospatial technology, in order to developing a scoring model. It looks like a heat map where there are certain attributes for industrial investment that you want to be close to, like highways and rail and electric transmissions lines and natural gas lines, et cetera. And then there are things that you want to avoid, like densely populated areas or areas that have steep topography, wetlands, conservation areas. And we developed a scoring model for different types of use, so heavy industrial, light industrial, freight and logistics. And when you add up all of those scores, then you look at the map, you've got something that looks like a heat map. And so we can focus on the areas that have the highest scores. Then we look for large parcels of land that we can either one that's large enough with just one owner, or several parcels that we can put together to build a site. The next phase is going through a little bit of due diligence to make sure that it has the utilities that can be served there. One of the things that's really important is land engagement, because we can identify a great site, but if the landowners are not willing to sell, then that's pretty much dead in the water. The other thing that we find is that we find a great site, and like I said before, it may already have been acquired. It's going to do residential development or solar or any number of things that are not necessarily the highest and best use. In the Bluegrass region, I mean, it's kind of like Beth said, that you are so ideally situated in terms of being able to access much of the U.S. market, that there's a lot of pressure from warehouse and distribution facilities. So it is true that we're kind of running out of available spaces. Now, we were able to identify several locations in the surrounding communities that have a lot of merit, but all of these sites, this is a long time frame. I mean, you don't identify and have something ready to market within just a number of months. You have to go through the due diligence, you have to go through the acquisition, either by an option or a write out. You want to have control of the property. And so it takes time, and that's why it makes sense to combine it with something like Beth is working on, which makes your existing sites. But once you get to the point where you're ready to market a new site, that is when you need to start looking for its replacement. Because you never know how quickly that site is going to be taken down. And if you wait until somebody actually purchases that property, then you're going to be out of the economic development for that type of site for another year or maybe even 2 years. So it has to be a constant cycle of replenishing your inventory.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic point. And, again, what I have seen in my, 12-year career in economic development is many communities lack the sort of political wherewithal to make investment for something that may or may not happen in the future. But I think what you just said is important, DiDi, that if you're not preparing for what's next, this site identification process that we've been engaged with global location strategies and DiDi's team has taken a year. It's literally taken a year. We started with 91 sites, DiDi, I think, that we evaluated at the desktop review. We sort of cut that in half to sort of investigate a little bit further. And we're now down to 5 sites that we're really going to, try to focus on as the best available opportunities. I think if my memory serves me correctly, Lexington had a site or two that we looked at the desktop view, but we're outside of the urban service boundary and therefore really not one of the highest priorities because of the things that we would maybe run into in the development process, to your point, right? It takes maybe another year and, a plethora of money to get those sites acquired and developed to be to the point of marketability, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So Beth, again, you've spent time in Kentucky with the product development initiative. We're in the second round of that process. Maybe you can speak a little bit to what you've seen in Kentucky, what sites have sort of voted well in your scoring process, how your scoring process plays out, and give the group a little bit of feedback on what we're doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'm going to kind of mesh a little bit of my Kentucky PDI experience with my recent kind of corporate experience of issuing some RFIs around the Lexington area. So first, let me back up and just say that from having been on the economic development side, from the economic developer's perspective, one of the most frustrating parts of economic development is putting blood, sweat, and tears into a project for a whole year, and you get down the road, you've done an RFI, you've had several site visits, you even get to the point of negotiation, then the project just goes quiet on you. You have no idea why, and that is probably one of the most frustrating things. So one of the things that the Kentucky PDI program we really stressed and felt really passionate about was providing feedback to properties about, kind of that post-site visit, that period of time where normally somebody would go quiet. So whenever we get back from site visits, we develop feedback for properties, and even those that go through the RFI process. For those properties that get site visits, we say, this is what we loved about the site visit. This is what we loved about the site. This is what we loved about your workforce pitch. These are the things that didn't land quite so well. And a lot of times you'd think that these would be kind of awkward conversations to have, but economic developers are so pleased to be finally getting feedback that it's actually really great, candid, productive discussions. And so at the heart of the PDI program, what we really want to do is help communities across the Commonwealth kind of elevate their game from a physical site readiness perspective, but also from how are you going to improve your pitch? Because economic development and having all these prospects come in after they visited 10 other communities, what you're really trying to do is create a vivid, memorable experience with quality real estate options. And convince them, because this is most important these days, site readiness is very important. It's incredibly difficult. It takes a lot of time and money. What is even more important is that workforce pitch, because obviously workforce, and as the video stated, there's a lot of risks associated with different workforce groups. So one of our jobs as consultants is to identify the risks from a physical site readiness and from a workforce perspective, and how can we get past those and prepare for those. You know, kind of based on my experience with the PDI program, what I'm seeing is, and I'm sure this wouldn't surprise DiDi at all, there are a lot of like last sites and industrial parks being submitted to get that last site ready, completely pad ready. There's a little wetland issue. Let's get rid of that. Let's go ahead, pad and grade. Let's clear that. Let's make sure it's absolutely ready. It's got all the infrastructure there. The infrastructure is already within the park, but let's make those last little extensions. That's what I'm seeing around Lexington and the neighboring areas. We've got one last site in that industrial park we need to fill up. And that probably means that that other property, that next premier industrial park in your community, needs to be well underway. And I'm certainly seeing that on the corporate side as well. It is incredibly difficult. You know, we issued one a few weeks ago, and we had difficulty finding a large enough site. And it wasn't, I think it was 50 acres or something like that, but we did have some heavier utility requirements. Those are just difficult to find. And with every single project, what we have is a trade-off between cost and quality. So we have some projects that are more cost sensitive that can be out in a little bit more rural areas. We have some projects that are highly quality sensitive that want to be in the city center so that they can attract the very best talent, and all of those workforce and quality of life amenities around there. So what we're seeing is kind of that trade-off between cost and quality, and how do we find and create more industrial parks. What I want to see are more, let's be extending more infrastructure lines to create entire new industrial parks, more so than let's finish out that one last site in each industrial park. So that's kind of my perspective on the area. Again, it's not specific to Lexington. These are problems across the country, but it is a very real story in the Lexington and the greater area.
I'm going to ask each of the three of you to maybe just give me a guess as to sort of what is the most popular request for land size that you all, see. Jeff, I'm not sure if you know that right off the top of your head, or maybe I'll give you a second to think about that. But DiDi, Beth, what sort of land availability should a community have in order to compete for a sizable manufacturing project, for example?
Yeah, sure. DiDi, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Go ahead, Beth.
I think the most important thing, and I know that this is a catch-all, but it's diversity in product, because every single one of my projects is different. And candidly, the types of real estate requirements that my projects need are probably different from the majority of what DiDi's need. DiDi works, really large, heavy industrial. Our bread and butter is more that mid-size, where we need, 20 to more likely 60 acres, somewhere in that ballpark. We work a lot of food manufacturing projects that do have, pretty good water and wastewater needs. So you have to think about, do we have the mid-size covered? Do we have the larger, like what DiDi may work more frequently, is the larger properties with rail access and really heavy utilities. So you need to have that, what I call the portfolio, kind of stacked with a diversity of product. I think a lot of communities work towards, all right, well, good, we got that industrial park set up. We're going to let the leads roll in and we're going to win it. But it's not, you need to have a diversity, because you have to have a reason for communities to visit, in a couple of different types of industry. So that's, I think, a really important consideration.
John, I agree with Beth there. I think we get a lot of 10 acres and above, it depends, and you get something really large, 100 acres and above, depending on whether or not it's manufacturing or distribution and logistics. But we'll get a lot, say anywhere from a building for 50,000 square foot to 100,000 square foot, but they want to know ahead what are the expansion capabilities. We want to be able to expand that by 2 times linear. Of course, my previous life, I worked for TVA, and I support these PDI programs. I regret that the state, the shortage of revenue due to COVID, that we're not supporting it now, but the door is not closed on that permanently. I want you all to know it. I'm a huge supporter of it. I was with TVA when they created the Invest Prep program. Something that I would encourage for Lexington and other communities is, for a period of time, I worked plastic companies specifically for TVA. I recruited plastic companies, and I was relatively young and new at this. But after working just about my first 5 projects on plastics, I came to realize very quickly there's a common thread in all of these. You could erase the name from Project X and just call it Project B. They're looking for the exact same thing. 50,000 square foot, expandable by 2 linear. They want rail access to a 4-lane highway, 75 miles to airport. Wow, there's a common thread. So around that, I developed a quick term spec building program. You're not just throwing up a spec building, but you're putting one up specifically to attract plastic companies. And we were very successful with that. I think Commerce, Lexington, and other communities, take a look at your targets, take a look at your clusters, and maybe you tweak that site or that industrial park just a little bit to make it more attractive to that target you're after.
Yeah, Jeff,
DiDi, what about more heavy? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what Jeff and Beth are talking about with the diversity is really important. And I think Jeff really hit the nail on the head, which is to know where you compete. So I typically work very large, heavy industrial, resource-intensive projects. Now, those types of projects tend to require 100, 150 acres or even more on rail, big power, big gas. They can go into slightly more rural areas as long as the infrastructure is there, because their capital investment relative to the employment that they have is high. They do need a very skilled workforce, but it's usually huge numbers that they need. And the benefits of those types of projects is that creates a very substantial tax base, which is not going to likely to move for decades. I mean, you think about things like aluminum smelters and rolling mills and chemical plants. I mean, these are, once you invest several $100 million into a facility, you are not going to pick it up and move it just because they may have to close. You never know because of market dynamics, but they're not going to go chasing the lowest cost of production somewhere else. So it's really about knowing where you compete. If you don't have that type of infrastructure, then you don't need to develop that type of product. But if you have, a really strong workforce, one of the things that we have done over the years is develop several different project profiles. And that's exactly what Jeff was talking about, is project profile for a plastics company. And we did this for the site identification program with KU, LG&E, where we said, we're going to develop these project profiles so that we can evaluate these sites that we have identified against those types of projects. And it's really helpful to know, for the communities to know, how do I compete? If I can't compete in this particular type of project, either because of cost or quality, then I don't necessarily need to develop a property that addresses that. So focus on the things where you can be really strong, whether it's food or plastics or really capital intensive heavy, and even warehouse and distribution has its place. So knowing where your sweet spot is, you're going to get the better return on your money. And Jeff, you said that you are a movie buff, so you'll probably appreciate this. From Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. I mean, you have to be willing to take the risk and invest in identifying and developing these products, because you could have the best community in the world, you could have very resplendent infrastructure. If you don't have a site that a company can land on that fits within the frame that they need, that, which we just talked about as being compressed, you're not going to win. You can't win. So it's the companies that are going to double down, keep with the fundamentals, taking on measured risk are the ones that are going to prosper coming out of this pandemic.
I agree.
Yeah, I've compared economic development to sort of a car lot in a lot of ways, because, you could have, if you don't have any cars on the car lot, somebody comes in and they say, I want a black Toyota Camry. And somebody says, well, I can go find that for you. Right across the street is another car dealership that's got a black Toyota Camry, right? And by the same token, if you've got cars on the car lot that haven't been polished and cleaned or smell good, or the tires are shiny and all those types of things, again, you may have the best car in the world, but if it's not polished and invested in on a continual basis, when somebody comes in, and the windshield wipers don't work and it starts raining on their test drive, it's just not going to go well. So I think there's a lot of comparisons between the competitive nature of that business and what we're doing, just to simplify economic development in a lot of ways. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of our questions. Workforce, obviously, Beth and DiDi both attested to in their comments that workforce may be the number one priority or challenge facing a lot of communities with regard to economic development prospects. That probably is a panel discussion in and of itself to talk about who's doing it well and how to set it up. So I'm just going to sort of attest to the fact that for the audience, workforce development is a significant component of this that we may not have time to really touch on today. I want to move to talking about, go ahead, DiDi.
Let me just say one thing about workforce that I think is different now than it was a year ago, which is obviously we have a lot more unemployed people than we did before all of this pandemic started, but they aren't the kind of people that necessarily have the skills for the types of jobs that are open, because I don't know any multi-skilled craftsmen who don't have a job. I mean, they're all gainfully employed. But there may be an opportunity to reach out to some of these people in the service industry who have lost their jobs to get them to go back to school and improve their training if they have the right financial incentives or capabilities to be able to do so. I mean, we have an opportunity right now where it's hard for somebody that is a bartender or a waiter or is cleaning hotel rooms and is making a living to convince them to give up their income to go back to school to improve their skills. But now they're sitting on the sidelines. So it might be a unique opportunity to draw them into the education system to get more certifications and a higher level of skills. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
No, I appreciate you saying that. Beth, anything else to add to that?
% spot on. We are having to again mutate, adjust, and evolve. And I think whenever I look back 10 years ago, economic developers today have to wear so much more of that workforce attraction hat than they used to. And now with COVID, there's no playbook, but you have to get creative. And I think that, the only thing I'll add is that the communities who are doing it the best are the ones who have the manufacturers who are in lockstep with them in the process. You have to get your manufacturers on board. And once you get them on board, then you can implement everything from K-12 onward. But it's important to have that kind of holistic approach.
John,
I'm going to call an audible. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Yep, go ahead.
DiDi and Beth both make great points there, but I think Kentucky is well poised with a good workforce due to our community college system and our research universities. And I'm watching something that we've done is I've put together 2 competitive analysis teams. One looks at contiguous states, one looks at the states with the highest win rates. Then we're taking a look at states that are actually incentivizing workers to move there. Well, I figure you're incentivizing them for a reason. That's because you have a shortage. That gives me a competitive advantage. We're not there yet. So with our community college system, free tuition for specific trades and vocations, if we capitalize on that, on second choice entry from the judicial system, and the video stated if somebody was talking about opioids, things like that, anytime somebody enters treatment or the judicial system or penal system, there should be almost a mandatory training. You shouldn't just be there. You should come out of there with a very marketable skill that is applicable to public employment. So I'm hoping that we'll take a look at that. But I think we are in an advantage as far as availability of workforce compared to some other states. Well, I know that for a fact in some areas.
Makes sense. All right. Well, that was a good topic. I didn't know that we would get into that too heavily, but I think that's all very relevant for the audience. I appreciate you guys saying that. Maybe the last topic of conversation here that we'll go to is, affordable housing. I think that was sort of addressed in some of the comments in the video that we heard at the beginning of this. But, in addition to affordable housing, companies, particularly those that are publicly traded, have environmental, social, or governance factors that are being applied to their site selection process and so forth. So how can economic developers or communities be prepared, for those sort of factors to, play into the decision-making process? And how can community leaders sort of navigate these variables in a productive way? DiDi, let's start with you on that one.
So, yeah, we work with a lot of early stage companies that are developing new technologies to, in some cases, they might be producing novel products like electric vehicles, but in other cases, they're creating new products like gasoline, for example, but using a much more environmentally friendly process than, refining crude. And because these companies are early stage, they're attracting investors. And you have companies like BlackRock that is the largest asset investor in the world, who are saying that we are going to be evaluating potential investments that they can make into companies, not purely based on the profit or the dollar value of their return. They're also going to be looking at the return that they get from an environmental and a social and a governance standpoint. What that means is that in the site selection process, these ESG, and mostly in site selection, it's the E and the S, the environmental and the social that we're focused on, have started to play a much, much bigger role. So we're looking at things like, affordable housing. Is there going to be locations for the workforce that is in our pay range? Where are they going to live? We also look at, will people be displaced because of the investment that we're making here? Don't see that quite as much as in Kentucky, but we see that a lot, particularly in Louisiana along the Mississippi River, but that's a key issue. We look at the environmental cost of water. I mean, are we going to be, drawing from water that's already strained, or are we going to have abundant water like is available in the Ohio and the Mississippi? That's an area where I think Kentucky does very well, that you have an abundance of water. What's the cost of carbon in this particular location? And so I think economic developers, while there's a limited things that you can do to change the reality in your community, at least you can be aware of where you stand and have the knowledge and the facts and the data to be able to respond to those types of questions, because we're seeing them come up more and more often with our companies that are trying to make corporate decisions.
John, I think this goes back to that whole regional concept that we were playing. I mean, in Detroit, New York, it may take you 30 minutes to go just a few miles, where here where I'm at, I can be anywhere in 15 minutes. So you take a Lexington proper, or Louisville, any large city that's saturated with housing. I hear that people from California are buying houses in Louisville sight unseen, and they're paying more than market cost. People in California just can't afford a home. That makes our communities more attractive. But the realtors here in Hopkinsville are telling me it's a housing shortage. Those realtors, the board of realtors, they have to be intertwined with your IDBs. They have to work with each other, feed off of each other, and strategize and plan together for development. The neat thing about Kentucky is that you can be in a metropolitan area and go a county away and be on a farm. And in some communities, you can be in a metropolitan area and be at a farm in 10 to 15 minutes. So we have that diversity that we offer there. There are a lot of studies that say that people are going to move away. That migration is already happening, that people are getting away from the larger cities. That again makes Kentucky attractive. And housing is something that we just have to invest in, along with quality of life. All these issues are coming full circle again. We're looking at downtown, entertainment, activities, outdoors, and recreation. Well, Kentucky offers all that. So we need to continue to invest in our housing stock and keep the Board of Realtors engaged with the IDBs.
Yeah, and from my perspective, that it is such a fine balance again, we come back to the word diversity and looking at your tax base and looking at the burden of residential on a tax base versus, the heavy capital investment of industrial tenants, and trying to find that balance between the two and making sure that they're kind of in unison. I think it's great that, y'all are addressing the head on and you're talking about it, in marketing videos. It's just very refreshing to hear that. And I think in an effort to not kind of duplicate what everybody else has said, start thinking about some of those ancillary social issues, like, and maybe it's just because I have toddlers, but I'm very sensitive to childcare right now. Available, affordable childcare is really tough for a lot of folks who are trying to, work for that $15 to $20 an hour. Finding availability, I've even seen some childcare, open up to where the kids go and sleep at night at these childcare facilities so that their parents can go and work that third shift. So what are the issues that are impacting your, production workers in a time where we are having so much trouble finding quality workforce? How can we help them get to the machine shop floor, make some money, and kind of elevate their own, success? So I think it's important to think about affordable housing, because that's at the baseline, but let's also think about some of those more ancillary issues too. And I think that Lexington is a step ahead on being in touch with some of those social issues.
Thanks.
Yeah, I've heard it referred to as Zoom towns as opposed to boom towns. So now that people are learning that they can work by Zoom, it doesn't work very good and very well in the manufacturing sector and the services sector, but certainly in office and other services like, legal and consulting, et cetera. People are finding that they do not have to live in, Atlanta or Charlotte or Chicago or New York. They can live wherever they want to and Zoom into work. And I think, Lexington in particular has a really good story to tell there. And you probably don't, to Jeff's point, you don't have to incentivize them. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't promote yourself as a Zoom town. And it also does, you should not, I've seen a lot of communities set up sort of non-financial incentives. So there's a city in Iowa that has a wingman program. So if you move to that location, then they assign you with sort of a wingman who's kind of your age, your stage in life, that can introduce you to all the things great about that community. And also think about, it's a little bit tricky right now about how we incentivize projects that locate in Kentucky or whatever state, even if the workforce is not physically there. It's not, like I said, it's not really for the manufacturing sector, but it's something that communities are having to think more and more about. And to Beth's,
and I know that
Beth's point, I cannot emphasize enough, houses do not pay for themselves. Houses without commercial and industrial investment is a losing proposition. So if your community only has housing and it's a great place to live and all that, you need to think about the diversity so you can stabilize that tax base.
Well, these are great points. And I know, on that last one, with regard to, a project locating someplace and having the workers maybe somewhere else, is, those are policy things that Jeff and the leadership of the cabinet and the legislature will be discussing, as we continue to move forward in the world that we live in. I could sit here for another 3 hours and have these conversations. Unfortunately, it looks like we're about out of time. I want to know from Bob or Andy if we're going to take any questions. But let me finally just say, before we turn it back over to Bob and Andy, it's been a privilege and an honor for me to be the moderator of this very talented, well-respected group and those that are friends of mine. And again, Beth and DiDi will spend more time in Kentucky as a result of the partnerships and programs that we're forming. Jeff and his team are going to continue to work tirelessly for the benefit of all of our communities in the Commonwealth, as will we in partnership with them. So thank you guys for being a part of the panel. And Bob and Andy, I'll turn it back over to you if you guys have questions or closing remarks for us.
Disappoint. This was fabulous. And John, you were tremendous as well as moderator. I could sit here and listen to you for a lot longer. So DiDi, Beth, Jeff, John, wow, fantastic. One of the, in life, they often say it's the simple things that people make mistakes at. And one of the things you hit on, a lot of really simple common sense things, but the honesty factor. Honesty, it's a given, right? Well, a lot of communities like just to tell about how great they are, but they don't want to look at where their faults are. Yeah, I thought you were excellent at bringing home the fact that you got to be honest. And I can tell you here in Central Kentucky, it's a strength that we are honest, and I think that's what's going to help project us forward. So I wish we had time for questions. I can tell you this will be a session that people are going to go back to look at for quite some time. So again, thank you all very much.